Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here. This is the Grow Farmer Forum on Drones and Weed Management. I am Emily Unglesby. I'm the Director of Outreach and Extension here at Grow, and we have a really great lineup of speakers with you. Our moderator is going to be Dr. Steve Lee, who is a weed scientist down at Auburn University and has a lot of research and done a lot of work in this area. And he's joined by Rick Jordan, who is the operations manager for CNY Drone Services, which operates out of New York. So we, unfortunately, our third panelist, Tyler Mudd, farmer from Missouri, is actually not able to be here today, but I think you'll find we have a lot of expertise and knowledge in the room. So this should be a great discussion. Before I hand it over to these folks, I just wanted to make sure everybody knows what Grow is and where you can find our resources. So we're a network of scientists, public weed scientists mostly, who are working to create resources on integrated weed management to help farmers nationwide fight herbicide resistance. So you can find everything we do on our website, growiwm.org. You can subscribe there and get some weekly news and research. And then we are also on these 4 social media platforms. So feel free to follow us there. Some housekeeping before we get started. This is a Zoom webinar, so nobody but the panelists should be able to speak, but we're very eager to hear your questions and get your feedback as we go. So please use that Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen to send in your questions as they occur to you, and we will try to answer them as they come in. And there also should be time at the end, hopefully, for anything we didn't get to during the conversation. Feel free to also use the chat if you need to communicate with me directly if you have any issues or concerns. And this is being recorded, so there will be a recording posted on our website either late this week or early next week, and anybody who registered will get a copy of that. So finally, we are offering CEU credits for CCAs in integrated pest management and precision ag tech, I believe. And so if you are here to get those, watch for them at the end of the webinar in the last few minutes. We will put up the QR code and the tracking number for you to retrieve those. So with that, I will turn this over to Dr. Lee to introduce himself and tell us more about this topic and get us started.
All right, thank you, Emily. All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Steve Lee. I'm the extension faculty here at Auburn University. So I was trained as a weed scientist. I ran a lot of weed control type of trial over the years, and then slowly doing more and more of application type of work, and also working with different type of drones, automation platform, and different workflows with very strong emphasis of application in the field. So, glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me to be the host of this event. And unfortunately, one of our panelists is not able to join us today. So blame on the weather. I think the weather is just too nice that people can't resist working outside. But luckily, we have Mr. Rick Jordan here with me from CNY Drone. His company is based in New York. And also, Rick and his company does a lot of different type of work regarding drone spraying and application. So I would like to ask Mr. Rick to unmute himself and give us an introduction about himself, his company, and his operation. Thanks, Rick.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. So like I said, I'm Rick, operations manager with CNY Drone Services here. So we do operate all across New York, Pennsylvania. We just recently became licensed in Vermont, and we are also currently changing the legislation for New Hampshire to actually allow drone operations to be practical, used up there as well. So we do, like you mentioned, all across the board, row crop spraying and things like that is kind of not really all that we do. That's actually kind of a side piece of what we do. Our main focus is vegetation management and control, invasive species management, aquatic applications, forestry applications, right-of-way spraying. The list kind of goes on and on with the stuff that we do. On top of that too, we're not, just a spraying company. We're also becoming actively involved in a SUNY ESF program to do biomass, what's the word for it? So it's biomass estimates and weed monitoring control and things like that, which we have, a multitude of different types of platforms and sensors that we use as well. So we do everything drone related in general. We're not really just a one size, we only do spraying. We do inspections, we do mapping, we do 3D modeling, pretty much everything across the board that you can think of. Anything drone related, we kind of got our hands in the pie on that.
Yeah. I know your company is based in Central New York. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah,
Central
so
New York.
CNY stands for Central New York. So
Okay.
central to us, if you're native to New York, all right, people might say, oh, you're in upstate New York. And by upstate New York, they mean, oh, you're just north of New York City. Well, guess what? There's more to New York than just New York City, for example. We're like 4 hours away from New York City, and we're actually centrally located in New York State. Like if you look on a map, how it kind of goes like this, we're right there, which actually puts us in a perfect position because anywhere that we go, it's 4 hours to get to the border west, 4 hours to get all the way to the bottom end of Pennsylvania, 4 hours east. Now we got Vermont, New Hampshire, so it's kind of like a perfect geographic
Yeah.
setting for our territory.
Yeah, yeah. And that is one big benefit of drone operation. You are able to cover way bigger ground than traditional crop dusting service. Let's put it this way, or traditional custom application. And plus, like you said, your company is already way beyond just spraying or spreading. You do other things as well.
Yes.
So that's great to hear. Just a quick message for the audience. If you have questions, please type your questions in the chat box. We will preferentially answer your questions first. Because if Rick and I don't see any questions, he and I are just gonna go back and forth and talk all day long. Who knows what we're gonna talk about at the end. So since
Yeah.
you get two of us here, and then if you have any questions or thoughts or comments you would like us to know, please take advantage, and we will stop by the chat box frequently and then answer those questions first. All right, just want to make everyone be aware of that, and don't wait until the end to type in your questions, because this is supposed to be a Q&A session to begin with. All right. So I guess following up with something that you said related to legislature and the regulations, could you tell the audience about the regulations, the certificates, and other things they need to have to be able to operate legally? And also there might be some potential problems here that new operators need to be aware about.
Yeah, well, I mean, that in itself could be an entire panel long discussion, to be honest with you. But just to kind of, give you guys a little bit of an introduction to it. Basically, you need to start with your Part 107. Man, the mosquitoes are out already. Come on. So you need to start with your Part 107. That right there is for commercial drone operations. Well, technically, there's actually a misconception in that, which I'll briefly touch on. So a lot of people think, well, you have to get paid in order to be required to have a Part 107. It's actually false. Basically, all drone flights fall at the base level, fall under Part 107. The only exemption to that is if you follow the criteria for recreational flights, which essentially means it has to be for your own enjoyment and nothing else. Going forward with that, basically, if you do anything with a drone that is not just for your own, just go out and fly it for fun, you got to have a Part 107. Expanding on that, now you also have to, for spraying operations, you then need to also have, I believe, did they change it to third class medical? I think they changed it to third class medical.
Yes, second class still works. A third class is acceptable, but I think the recertification period for third class is shorter than second.
Yeah, so that's
your
because
second or third year.
I did a second class because when we did it, they required second, but I thought that they changed it to the third. So you need to have your third class medical certificate, which is essentially, you
Mhm.
go to a doctor and they just sign off on it. It's really nothing too crazy.
Right.
Going on to that, your biggest ones and your hardest ones to kind of obtain is going to be your state issued pesticide licensing. Now, this is going to vary state by state. What license I have up here is most likely not going to work out in, Wisconsin or something. So you need to check with your Department of Agricultural or your Department of Conservation, whichever it may be for your state. Generally speaking, you're going to be required to have your aerial category. And then you're also going to have the category for that type of application that you're going to be spraying, whether it's agricultural or turf or forestry. You need to have that appropriate category also.
Yeah.
So that's something, once again, it differs by state. You want to check into that. You're also going to need your Part 137 operator certificate. That is usually the biggest one to get. They streamlined it apparently now where it's almost like a self-certification,
Yeah.
which I don't quite agree with because, you're spraying things that make your lungs bleed out of an aircraft. And I don't really think anybody should be able to just come up and say, sure, I'm good to go. Either way, so you do have to get your Part 137 operator certificate, however, whichever way you go about getting it. I'm not too familiar on that process anymore because, back in my day, it was,
Yeah, you
I
had to
think it
go
took
through
us,
physical.
yeah, it was like 10 months, I think it took us to get our Part 137, and that was expedited.
Yeah.
So also on top of that, you're going to need to have your Part 44807 exemptions. Basically, that is relief from certain regulations that apply to aircraft, because technically drones that weigh over 55 pounds are technically classified as experimental aircraft. So now one of the regulations, for example, is they require you to have seat belts for the passengers.
Mhm.
And you have to explain why that regulation should not apply to you.
Yeah.
Common sense says, well, it's an unmanned aerial vehicle, but bureaucracy. Anyways, that's pretty much your primary things of what you really have to get started with. But, other things to really look into is insurance.
Yeah.
You cannot go wrong. We have like 4 different layers of insurance here. We're covered. If somebody sneezes and catches a cold, we'll be covered. So insurance is a big one for us.
Yeah.
Past that, I think that's pretty much it for, basic requirements. There's obviously that's a topic that we could go on and on about all day long. And I'm
Yeah.
noticing that we do have a bunch of questions coming in here though. So I don't know if we want to start answering these guys.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a good overview of the regulations here. And then we can look into the chat box here. And I would imagine as a weed control focused webinar series, there would be a bunch of weed control, weed scouting related questions. Actually, Rick, remember these type of what type of software, what type of drone you use to map the weeds type of question is a fairly frequent on Facebook as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it really is. There's a lot of different ways to go about it. It's one of those, it's kind of like pick your poison. It's almost like, what exactly are you trying to do? But realistically, it comes down to what type of drone. You either want multispectral or just RGB, so it's kind of like you don't really need to have multispectral necessarily for weed mapping. Most of the weed mapping that I do is not multispectral. We usually use visual analysis, which is, coincidentally, a little bit of show and tell for you. So this is the Phantom 4 RTK. I actually prefer this over the Mavic 3 Enterprise or even the Mavic 3 Multispectral, mainly because with this guy here, I can do real-time mapping with DJI Terra. So as this drone is flying, it's processing the map. And by the time this thing lands, that map is usually done in another 5 or 10 minutes. So I prefer the P4 RTK. So this is what we use primarily for weed mapping. If we want to actually do more of a multispectral analysis to try to determine, different types of weeds, green on green sort of aspect rather than, green on brown, this is the multispectral that we primarily use. This is the EB, the ag version, which of course has the multispectral camera down on the bottom. And this will allow us to cover a lot more territory than any rotorcraft does. This thing just flies right along, and I love it, but I hate it because at the same time, in order to land this sucker, you got to crash it. So I don't really like that.
Breaking it. And
So it's a
sometimes,
little bit more situational.
yeah, sometimes you do run
Yep.
into an obstacle or something, break that thing apart, and they come with a glue in the box. You just glue this thing
Yeah. You
back
just
together,
glue
you
it
know.
all back together. So like
Yeah.
I said, that one's a little more situational. I love it, but I also don't like it at the same time. But as far as to identify the weeds, so we go through, we map the area. Usually we're going to be running not at 400 feet, but we'll usually be a lot less, sometimes 200 to 300, mainly because with the P4 you want a really crystal clear image when you're doing weed mapping for this type of application. We usually use we have tinkered around with Agremo, but quite frankly it's pretty expensive. So we usually end up using Solvay. Solvay is basically an AI detection software. There's a dozen of them out there, to be honest with you, but I like Solvay. It's really powerful stuff. And, you basically draw a box around your field, and then inside that box, you draw circles and everything around the areas that you're looking to identify. I think you do like 10 or 15 of them to train the AI. Then it scans through the entire data set, and then you'll have a whole bunch of little dots, and it'll tell you how much, what your weed pressure is. And then from there, you can export that as an actual shape file, and then we can do, variable rate spraying or even spot treatments if we wish. Spot treatments is a little bit funky because DJI doesn't really handle true spot spraying where it just goes to that area, sprays it, goes to the next one, sprays it. You gotta finagle it to really make it work that way. But it can, works just fine during that time. So I think that answers kind of that question. So yeah, we do, usually when we're spraying weeds too, we don't do a lot of variable rates. We don't do a lot of spot treatments necessarily. Usually when we're doing weed control, we're just going to spray the whole field anyway. We do some spot treatments, mainly when it's like burr cucumber, for example. That stuff is pretty nasty and hard to get rid of. So we do spot treat on that, mainly because you can see it just when you're flying the spraying drone. I don't even have to map those things because you'll have patches of them that are half an acre to an acre wide,
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
yeah, it really just depends on the use case.
Yeah, that's one thing I would agree as well. Spot spraying with a drone, commercially speaking, not this your small research plot. We're talking about hundreds of acres a day.
Yeah,
That spot is not going to be too small because if you can look at the big bro UAV drone behind Rick, kind of figure out how big that thing it is when it's fully unfolded. All right, it's going to spray pretty wide pattern. So some people ask me that question as well. See and spray versus spray drone. Can you make spray drone do the see and spray thing? The answer is a firm no. There's no way this will ever happen. If you're ever seeing how spray drone works. So it's a good tool to clean the patches of weed. And for example, most of the weeds start from the at the field edges. The spray drone is a good tool to hammer those troublesome area. Or if you have a low-lying ditch in the middle of the field where just full of weeds, stuff like that would be great. But individual weed spraying like see and spray, you're asking for too much, and this is why see and spray can cost you $600,000, $800,000, and a T40 spray drone runs 35 grand. So you get what you pay for at the end. And also mapping really small weeds is not feasible with the current scouting drone. compared to CN spray. CN spray has so many sensors on the boom, constantly looking down, and it's only like maybe a couple feet off the ground. Versus when we do commercial field scouting, it's 300 feet ish. So at a 300 feet, you need object to be at least maybe this bottle size, like Coke bottle, or this peanut bottle size, to be able to see it. And also we know for weed control, it's always smaller the better. Whenever I can see this from 300 feet, it's already getting a little too big to be controlled in row crops. You know, that's just a perspective, you know, from our experience with spot spraying in row crop. And also telling which type of weed it is, that's pretty difficult, almost impossible from 300 feet, 400 feet. I can see the little weeds popping up, you know, in a circle or in a certain shape, because in row crop, anything green growing in between the rows is not something you want, you know. But to be able to tell what is that green thing in between two rows of soybean, I can't do that, you know, from 300 feet. I can see there's something there, but I don't know what it is.
Yeah, that's a very good point too, is, you know, this sensor type is going to kind of determine what you're going to be able to see, what kind of weeds you're going to be able to see. You know, I've been tinkering around because I've been seeing, you know, the 61 megapixel Sonys and everything that you can put on the M300s. I've been tinkering with the idea of throwing that on there and seeing if we can still run it at, you know, 300-400 feet for efficiency's sake, but still be able to zoom in enough to be able to see exactly what kind of weed that is based on the leaf structure. But I mean, that's also like in another, the sensor by itself, I think is like 30 grand. So is that really something that you want to drop money on a maybe? So we'll see what happens.
Yeah. There needs to be some autonomous ground scouting vehicle, really doing the ground scout for that purpose.
Yeah.
Yeah, drone has its own
It's I think like drones by itself is just a tool. I don't really think that, you know, drones, just you're doing it with just drones, flying drones, UAVs at least, is going to be an end all type of solution. You know, they're still going to require ground truthing. You know, you're still going to want somebody to go down there and, you know, snip the leaves. I don't actually even know what they actually call that scientifically. But, you know, taking the leaf sampling, you know, soil moisture content, all the science that goes into farming, which quite frankly is way above my level. I'm not a farmer. I'm more of just a, you know, IT guy, applicator. You know, that's what I know. I don't know the science behind growing yet. But I don't believe that drones in themselves are going to be a, you know, a Swiss Army knife. You know, I do believe that you're still going to need somebody on the ground, you know, at least for, you know, for ground truthing purposes.
Yeah, ground truthing is not possible to be replaced. You know, it always has to be there.
Yeah, and thinking about also another things about being replaced. How many times have you heard people saying, "Oh yeah, drones, you know, replace your crop duster with our drones"? Yeah, for anybody that's listening about that, is there's a lot of hype with newer operators, especially, who come up and think that they're just going to replace crop dusters.
Yeah. That's usually people with naive understanding, you know, rookies and stuff like that.
Yeah, so just throwing it out there, we're not going to replace a crop duster or even a tractor. You know, it's just different tools for different jobs and different circumstances.
Crop duster will be there, but they probably will replace themselves with fixed wing drones in a lot of situations too, you know, down the road, because every industry is looking for automation, cut back on the labor, cut back on human input, and especially with crop dusting being a really risky business. You know, dozens of people get killed every year in the U.S. I'm just seeing the automation will be inevitable in that industry as well.
Eventually, I mean, they are doing a trial of it, I think, just here in Vermont, where they're building the big, you know, the big fixed wings there that are, it's just a regular airplane, but you can control it with a remote control. So I think once the technology matures enough for that, then we're going to see a lot more of those. But once again, you know, it's a regular drone like how we are doing it. We're never going to be able to outwork those things.
Yeah, for folks interested in that topic, you can Google Pika, Pyka, see what that company has to offer. I'm sure you will find it interesting,
Mhm.
um, kind of take a peek of how future operation looks like. All
Yeah,
right,
absolutely.
we probably want to move on to the next question because the next question is a good one. Also a fairly sensitive subject as well. Will the government shut us down over the non-U.S. made drones? I think particularly Chinese made drones. And also, where can we go for U.S. made equipment that will work well? I throw this hard one to you first.
Oh, thanks. I see how it is. Well, I suppose I kind of deserve it, since the person who is heading up that bill is actually the New York representative here, or whatever her title is. I can't remember. Elise Stefanik. There, she's New York. She's actually I'm in her district. So sort of thing. Anyways, the chances that the government will actually shut it down, I don't really think is going to happen. That's just my personal opinion, though. Sure, they're making a lot of noise, in the Washington there, but I don't really foresee that actually happening. I mean, that they supposedly have right now, the ban on federal and state, some states, I believe, for the actual agencies cannot use anything except for a blue list UAV, which is really funny. And you may have seen this on Facebook. That bridge collapsed down in Baltimore a few weeks ago? Did you notice that the NTSB was down there flying a Phantom 4?
That's a good one.
So if it's really all so, scary about how, China is spying on us and all this stuff, I mean, first of all, the claims are ridiculous. The spy satellites all across the country, and we do it too. The U.S. does it. Those spy satellites take so much data and imagery every single day, more than any of all the drones combined. They're not getting any secrets from us. So it's just kind of like, all these claims are bogus. I mean, one of them was even saying that the drones that are flying can detect someone's blood pressure and heartbeat.
Yeah, those are just conspiracy theories.
I mean, first of all, it can. But secondly, even if it could, what are they going to be using this information for? um, so that's just kind of my opinion on it, is just ridiculous. I don't actually foresee it happening. It sounds to me like an opportunity for some politicians to get their palms greased with some
Yeah.
lobbyist money, and that's really what it comes down to.
Yeah.
As far as actual places U.S. made, who to go through or what are good ones, I mean, the only real major player that I really know is Hylio. They pretty much are just Bro UAV though, and they're just rebranded with their own software. And Bro UAVs are Chinese. So are they actually good? I don't know. I've seen people use demos with them, and they look like they're like any other of the dozen of different brands you can buy. At the same time, I've heard people that have used them and said that they're garbage. I don't know. Then again, I've seen people who also fly DJI stuff and say that DJI is garbage. So at this point, I don't really think that there's any one single main player out there, US based at least, that can kind of compare to the standards that DJI has been setting. And plus a couple other brands like XAG and things like that. Try not to be like too one pro brand or anti-brand this. It's just kind of realistic based on my experience and thought process behind them.
Yeah. I agree
But
with
yeah,
you.
that's really it. But that is, like you said, a sensitive subject, and it's there's a dozen different opinions about it too. But that's kind of my opinion, and I do genuinely believe that it's shared with the majority of professional drone operators out there.
Yeah. And also, when we talk about the potential Chinese drone ban, we also need to separate the public entity usage and the true commercial private usage, because banning the commercial private usage is pretty difficult, and I've been asked this question so many times, and I've been telling a lot of people the same thing as well. Pay attention to the TikTok. What happened to the TikTok ban?
Yes.
If
Yeah.
Congress mean business, they will get TikTok out of the way. They will ban it probably right away, and I think Joe Biden already indicated he'll sign the legislation, if it gets onto his table. But is it really going to happen? We'll wait and see. So I guess my point is, if they're able to successfully ban the TikTok from everyone, it's just gonna be gone from the Apple, App Store or whatever. Then we may have a legitimate concern about a Chinese drone. But TikTok being a way, way bigger target, and if the Congress cannot even ban TikTok, I think the smoke around the Chinese drone ban is more likely just gonna be a bunch of drama put on by the politicians try to score points in the election year, particularly, just for show to get votes. That's just personal opinion, but it's a pretty touchy issue, and the loss of the safety concern is just, I mean, if you don't want this thing to connect to the internet and be controlled by the Communist Party, just fly local, fly with local network. If you don't want to install their app, you can fly those spray drones just using your controller. You don't have to, use the fancy internet workflow or whatever, But U.S. replacement is mostly, well, I should say it's either expensive or the capability is not quite there. One of the two. So a lot of times it's both,
Yeah.
So at the same time, if Congress really mean business to ban the Chinese drones, I'm really hoping to see they provide more incentives, as subsidies for the American manufacturers so they can catch up, So we still have some options left. But anyway, federal agency and state agency, that's a easier target. The concern is there. I mean, I understand that, but I'm hoping even though the ban is inevitable at some point, they may give us a few more years of wiggle room. For example, if I buy a DJI drone next year and here comes the ban, for all the state and federal agency that, we just can't use it and can't buy any new DJI drone anymore. I hope they'll provide a grace period so we can still fly these drones for another 3 to 5 years, hopefully.
No, especially too, from a private standpoint. I mean, if those agencies are being forced to, kind of switch over to U.S. made and they have to basically disband their fleet, I really hope that they hold public auctions so we can buy those things for dirt cheap.
Yeah. Yep. The cost is the big thing. The cost is a big thing.
Yep.
Yeah, that's just a sad subject, if the Chinese drone ban really hits the private companies, here's my estimate, Rick. I would say 90% of all the drone scouting company will be out of the business without access to those Chinese drones.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the implications behind it though is kind of scary to think about, from a spraying operation. Why I'm not particularly too concerned myself is because we're already kind of gearing up to be basically producing our own equipment. So for our purposes, and possibly even making it commercially available is kind of already in our wheelhouse. So we're kind of already transitioning to it's almost like is a safety net in case this Chinese ban does come through. Well, we're already kind of gearing towards that line anyway. And on top of that, being able to produce and maintain our own fleet internally, I mean, now we don't have to drop 40 to 50 grand on a new drone every time we need to, replace one or expand. So for us as a business, it just makes sense to kind of go down that path preemptively,
And also there's another talking point, let's just say let's just assume if the Chinese drone ban is coming, and this might be coming after another 2, 3 years. We know when they implement that ban, they're not gonna say that, oh, you can't fly DJI right away. They usually have to provide a grace period, for
Right.
these existing stocks to play out,
Yep.
existing equipment to play out. So that brings another point. These drones are all electronics. They're similar as your iPhone, or computer, your TV. None of these things can last 20 years. Most of the
Mhm.
lifespan of the drones we have is about 3 to 4 years. Would you agree
Right.
with that?
Yeah.
Because new generation come out every year. So let's just say, even though we're facing the uncertainty of Chinese drone ban, but what's going to happen down the road and what's happening now, there's a difference here. So if we
Mhm.
still have wiggle room, and this wiggle room is easily 3 to 5 years, I think it's still safe to buy and use it for now. Well, nobody can predict what's going to happen down the road 10, 20 years later, but at least after you buy the drone, you can still use it. Nobody will force you to put it on the shelves and catching dust, from that
Yeah.
point. So, so the
Yeah. And
concern
this,
is there, but I wouldn't label it as the end of the world. It just sounds like doomsday is happening.
yeah, yeah, it's definitely, in my opinion, it'd be kind of more of like a long-term type of
Mhm.
situation that could occur. It's definitely not a right around the corner. And then, what happens, in August of this year, all of a sudden we're
Mhm.
all grounded,
Yeah.
definitely it's not, this is more of like a, long-term type of thing that could happen down the road. But I mean, and we just had a question too coming up about Hylio just got the FAA approval for swarming heavy drones in agricultural. And that's a kind of a great point that can kind of transition this discussion too, is that Hylio did get it put in, and it was approved. And quite frankly, I don't think that there was any preferential treatment was saying, oh, just because they're US made, we're only going to approve them. From what I've been hearing too, is that, the T40s, the T50s, T30s, all of those are kind of slotted to kind of also get this type of swarming
Yeah.
approvals done. So it's a huge impact for this industry. I mean, the ability to swarm these drones is
Mhm.
huge.
At
Previously it
night,
couldn't be
and
done.
also at night. Yeah.
What's
Swarming at
that?
night. I said
Oh
swarming at
yeah, yeah,
night, not
swarming
just
at
swarming,
night even.
otherwise night. Yeah.
Um, oh, actually, yeah. So Emily just said, so swarming. Yeah, so swarming, if anybody's not familiar with the term swarming. So swarming basically means the ability to control more than one drone from a single controller. Okay. So you can have one controller and then you can say have 3 different drones, and each one of those drones is basically segmented. So you take your field, the whole boundaries, and it would basically segment it based on how many drones you have, however you choose. And then each one of those drones basically just takes off, flies that one. This one's flying that part of the field. This one's flying the other. And then they just come back, land, refill independently, as they need it. So that is a huge boost, because now you can basically take this, say it's a 100-acre field. Let's just say spitball, your one drone can do, 20 acres an hour, just spitballing. That's essentially, 5 hours that you would have to run to get this 100-acre field done, right? If you have 5 drones running at 20 acres an hour, you can do that 100-acre field in an hour.
Yep.
you know so that's kind of what swarming is just having one controller and multiple drones flying all at the same time. Increases your coverage, or not coverage, your efficiency primarily. Usually, you go to a field, you only really want to set up in one spot at a time. And so if you just set up and you have multiple drones out there and you get that field done really quickly, now you can just move to the next one and just rinse and repeat. Yeah,
Yeah. I'll follow up on the
so that's what swarming
swarming.
is.
Yeah. So I'll follow up on the swarming concept just a little bit more. You
Mhm.
are, as a commercial operation, you are able to fly multiple spray drones in the same field, but it's not a true swarming because now you need to have multiple controllers and multiple pilot in control, multiple visual observers to
Yep.
operate individual drones individually. And also that brings another problem, you know, because these drones fly in the same field at the same time, do not talk to each other. So they might
Hmm.
be going out at the same time, they might be coming back at the same time. You have to somehow avoid a mid-air collision, you know,
Yeah.
and stuff like that. So swarming means you're using the single controller to monitoring multiple drones. So they are flying in a more coordinated way, you know, that causing you problem. And also, well, there was another point I want to talk about swarming. Because since the helio exemption got brought up, they not only allow them to do swarming, they're also allowing them to do swarming at night. So that brings out another problem, you know, spraying at night. Not every chemical, not every situation is a good situation to swarm at night. We bring in
Yep.
a lot of the gray area discussion, you know, the temperature inversion, off-target movement
Mhm.
because of volatility, all those good stuff. So still gotta be careful about spraying at night and also swarming big drone at night. If you have done your homework, if you map all the obstacles, and then that's okay. But if you haven't and you start to swarm at night, you're gonna pay back very quickly at some point because the
Which,
crowd.
going back to my original part about making sure you have good insurance.
Mhm. Yeah,
But yeah, I fully agree. Nighttime stuff is definitely not something that should be taken lightly in that regard. We've tinkered around using like the T10s and things like that with our, the night swarming waivers and all, or not night swarming, but sorry, just the nighttime flying waivers and all that. And I'm not gonna lie to you, it was kind of pretty scary. I mean, you can't really see what you're flying at.
nope.
I can certainly understand the use case in certain circumstances, but me personally, if I didn't really have a need, like if there would have to be something specific to make me want to fly this thing at night.
Yep.
Um, Autonomous flights are fine and all, but you can't always rely on it. I mean, obstacle avoidance is there, but it shouldn't be relied on to make sure that you don't crash. The analogy that I like to say about obstacle avoidance too is it's basically like wearing a seatbelt when you're driving a car and hoping that that saves you from a crash rather than pressing on your brakes and turning the wheel. It's really just a safety feature. And, at nighttime, most of the obstacle avoidance features are done visually like that. And I could be wrong. Maybe I'm thinking of other drones, but most of the visual, obstacle avoidance is done visually. So how is that going to work, at night, you know? Um, so yeah, I mean, it opens a lot of doors, but in my opinion, I don't really think it should be used that often to begin with.
No, spray at night is risky business. And
Yeah,
definitely not for the rookies, you know, don't try to spray at night as soon as you get a drone. So
yeah, that too.
yeah. Um, there's a related question about visual contact with the drone at all times, and how does that impact in using a drone at night? Do you have a waiver to do beyond line of sight operation, Rick?
We don't. We were tinkering around with trying to put together like specific use case, because here's the kicker with us is that we're in central New York here. We're 10 minutes down the road from what's considered the drone corridor of New York, which basically allows us to do all sorts of testing, BB loss and everything. So we've been trying to tinker with getting that sort of operation up. But when it comes to visual line of sight at night, the drone has spotlights on it. You turn the spotlights on it, technically you can maintain visual line of sight, because you don't actually have to see the actual drone. You just have to see where it is. You also, I believe, would have to put one of these guys on there, which these are the Firehouse Arc 5 or 4 or something like that. These basically give the ability to see the drone from, like miles away, basically. I think it's like 3 statute miles or nautical miles. So going forward with that, though, yes, you do need to maintain visual line of sight at all times during your normal spraying operations. I don't think anybody's been approved for BV loss yet with the big boy drones.
Yeah.
So
All
I
smaller than the
really wish we
US.
could.
Yeah.
Yeah, the
All
smaller
smaller
ones,
than
sure.
everything. Yeah. Yeah. Something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. The
And
big
also,
boys, I mean, I would love it if we could, but
yeah.
fortunately not.
Yeah.
Mhm.
All right. Well, that's a good point. Um, let's see. What let us know about the library creation of weeds. Not exactly sure what does library creation mean here.
Yeah, I
You?
saw that one. I was honestly going to leave that one for you because that's kind of more like a sciencey type thing. Um,
Yeah, I don't
yeah,
know what
I'm not too
library
sure about
means,
that one,
English
to be honest
library or
with you.
whatever. Yeah, all right.
Yeah.
Okay, what is a good price a producer should expect to find a mapping for weeds if done by a service? Would this also include a crop health check using the same data? You can answer this one, I'm sure.
So good price point for that. It's anywhere from $0 to $10 an acre, to be honest with you. It depends on the deliverables. It depends on your location. It depends on how many fields you have, the average field size. It depends on what level of scanning that we're really doing. When it comes to like crop health reports and things like that, around here at least, they get that service done for free by their local chemical supplier. So there's not really any money in it in my area to do that exclusively. When we do those type of applications or things, we're kind of more doing it just as a curiosity type of factor. Most people, they don't really even care about the weed pressure. They just say go spray it anyway. You know, um, the crop health checks as well. We will provide the data, is all I'm going to say to that, is that we will do the flight and we will give the data to them. But at no point will we actually do an actual crop health check, mainly because we don't do ground truthing. We're not agronomists. We're not certified crop advisors, and we don't pretend we are, you know. Sure, the software can do a lot of the stuff, but if you don't know how to interpret that data, you could be given wrong information. And just from a liability standpoint, we do not make those recommendations. But like I said, price point, we sometimes will just do them for free. I mean, a lot of the times we need to actually map the field to go do our spraying operation anyway. So we will just give them whatever data we have and provide that mapping for free. I mean, I've heard of a lot of people in this area were charging, $3-4 an acre. So that's kind of give you some kind of an idea on that.
Yeah.
Let's see.
I agree with what you said because I'm a big promoter of using drones to scale crops. I presented multiple times down here to our crop scale, during crop scale meetings and during other similar meetings. We already have a few big crop scales bought Mavic 3 multispectral. They fly M3M because it's easier to carry. And they literally provide like the NDVI map, crop health, like quick
Yeah.
analysis from the drone. Some of them run stand counts with
Mhm.
the drone, and maybe they can, help you scale to the weedy patches. Most of those people would provide those type analysis for free because they're using
Exactly.
the drone, using the software as a tool to support a crop scouting business. It's not
Mhm.
a part of the service that they'll sell
Yeah,
to
it's a
people,
tool on the tool belt.
It's just a tool in a toolbox because you know this, a pretty NDVI map. Oh, it looks pretty cool. And then you sell this to me for $3 an acre. I'm not gonna buy it. What I'm gonna
Yeah,
do with it? There's
yeah,
no
exactly.
insights, no actions come with it. Yeah, but
Yeah.
that's the problem. Yeah. Okay, the library creation is for near real-time weed mapping.
Yeah, I think I know what he's referring to now, but quite frankly, that's nothing that these type of spraying drones at least
No.
will use or incorporate. I see you've asked a follow-up question about the sensors and cameras. Um, multispectral in general. I mean, what are the names of them? Particularly the Mica Sense. You know, you could have the M3M as well for multispectral. There's a few different bands, and it really just depends on what level of detail that you're really trying to get would determine what kind of sensor that you want to use. You know, in that particular regard, I would say you'd really want to contact somebody directly and describe your actual particular use case to get an actual recommendation for that type of thing. You know, but there's just too many sensors out there to kind of list them all and tell you which one to use.
Yeah, everyone has a different budget, has different operation. You know, some people want a
Yeah.
real high resolution camera. A lot of those people use it for ground survey purpose. You know, I
Right.
understand that. But
Yeah.
just you know, talk about real-time weed mapping with a drone. You start to put a lot of
There, yeah.
pressure. You start to put a
It's
lot of
not
pressure on the
there
drone.
yet, but I really
We're
think it
not
is
there
going to go
yet.
that way. Not yet, but give it another
Yeah.
10 years.
Yeah. Well,
Looks
never
like
say never.
we got one more question about the swarming part of it, and then I think Emily was saying something for it too. Yeah, so real quick about the last part of the swarming. So swarming pushes the capacity of the operator. 8 minutes of flight time means you can only swap batteries and refills so quickly. Is swarming really a productivity boost, or is it a stressor limited by how quickly the operator can turn the drones around? Now, in my particular operation, our big boys here, for example, these got like 20-gallon tanks on them. Our downtime, by the time that drone lands, and we swap 2 different batteries, by the way, not just one, and we also have to refill 20 gallons of payload, that thing is on the ground for 45 seconds or less. So as long as you have a good solid ground crew and you have an efficient setup, having 3 drones on there, sure, you might have to throw another ground crew personnel out there, but realistically, it would double and or triple your actual productivity. So, you know, this is like a F1 pit crew. You know, it's not the drone comes down and you guys casually go over, take the battery out, set it down. Oh yeah, let's start filling it. Let's chit chat while we're doing it. No, this thing is boom, 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 boom. It's like with the pit crew. Same sort of thing. And with swarming, you're gonna have to do that even further. So your efficiency boost is only going to be related to how quick you can or can't do it yourself.
Yeah. And also, whether swarming helps in the long run or not also depends on automation. What we really need is the auto tank refilling and the battery changing station. It's almost like a totally autonomous mixing trailer, right? You know,
Yeah,
so the drone can
exactly.
come back and land on it. It's just everything done autonomously and then fly out, you know, without any human interaction. So that's what is
Yeah,
really going to boost the efficiency.
yeah. Right. Yeah, I think Emily was saying something in the chat there.
It's like, yeah, she wants us to talk a little bit about basic drone operation in case
Yeah. Okay.
some of the people watching this just don't have any clue about the technology. How about
Yeah,
you start with,
I think we derailed a little bit and started going down some
yeah,
rabbit holes.
yeah,
But yeah, so yeah, why don't you go ahead and we'll start, you know, on the first talking points and we'll kind of go from there.
yeah. Let's see. All right, let's just start with the basics, you know, for typical row crop operation or typical operations. Um, what are the suitable applications for spray drones and what are not?
Hmm. Yeah, that's pretty basic. Corn is the biggest one that comes to mind. Corn is it's one of the most useful, or rather, drones and aerial applications in general is probably most useful on corn. Probably you know, because you can't really get things in there once it gets so high. I personally think corn is the biggest one. We've also done applications on soybeans. You know, we've also been doing it on like pumpkins and, you know, all sorts of different crops. In my particular mind, I don't really think that there is necessarily a crop out there where drones wouldn't be suitable for. But the biggest one that comes to mind is definitely corn.
Yeah, I'll chime in here. So for most of the row crop applications, you are able to use the drone, but that doesn't mean it's a wonder that it'll work on everything.
Yeah,
For
absolutely.
example, liquid UAN, highly corrosive, and also the spray volume is too high. That's one thing really tough on the drones to spray, you know.
Mm,
And then your major fertilizer, I'm talking major elements, or NPK, all right, it's gonna be several hundred pounds per acre. And you can
yeah,
basically forget about using the drones to spray several thousand acres. It'll take a year to finish, you
right.
know. So that's another thing that it just won't work too well. And
Yes.
then if I have to come up with a third example, certain chemicals being very hard to agitate, soil herbicide particularly, because you
Hmm.
guys know what happens after you put full rate label of warrant with prowl, with atrazine, with, carborane, all these things together. Those tank mix gets pretty thick, and then
Yep.
agitation become even a challenge on ground sprayer. And then you got to keep in mind the little spray drones do not have any agitation at all. So when
Yeah.
you spray the chemicals with formulation that are not very easy to work with, and also these chemicals come with a fairly high use rate. That use rate change a lot of consideration too. 1 ounce use rate, oh, I'm happy with it all day long. But if I look at a label, it says 4 pints per acre. I'm gonna have a concern about this product settling down to the bottom,
Yeah.
because it doesn't even remain homogenized for 5 minutes. So that kind of covered the incompatibility problem. And also, when it gets to tank incompatibility, low GPA operation for row crop, like 2 to 3 GPA, is the worst. Sometimes the tank mix might be compatible at 10 to 15 GPA, but at 2 to 3, you're just getting jellies, or layer
Mhm.
separation very quickly. You might have some experience with that, in your operation.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that was due to a let's just say an apprentice error. Despite going through the basic pesticide training and everything, we did have this one occasion where he was brand new. I think it was like his second day out in the field, and he decided to save time by pre-mixing the three different materials together into one jar and then pouring it into the water to mix, and it just completely turned everything inside of that drone into jelly. It was definitely a teachable moment,
Mhm.
and it was one of those, hey, what did we learn here today? Is don't mix the chemicals together before you put them in the water.
Mhm.
So yeah, absolutely. We fully understand what you're talking about there.
Yeah.
Which,
So our
oh wow, look
best.
at that. That was one of the questions right there. How do you manage tank mix incompatibility in low GPA applications?
Yeah.
Um, don't mix it together before you put it in the water. That's the key takeaway. Um, yeah, I mean, it really comes down to know your chemicals. Do the jar test, for example, and quite frankly, that's kind of more of a actual pesticide applicator type question than it is drone specific. That's more of a how do you actually mix chemicals together correctly? Which pesticide
Easily.
labels, you got to follow the label, and they a lot of times they will have specific instructions to do jar testing in specific orders, to determine compatibility between the chemicals.
Yeah, that's right. Also, the label usually tell you the sequence of mixing. A common issue
Yeah,
is you mix the fertilizer, foliar fertilizer last. That's a big problem.
yeah,
And also, if you foresee you're gonna have some issue with the compatibility, get a commercial adjuvant, compatibility agent to thin, that mix a little bit. So that helps too. All right, we'll hurry up to the next one. So how about spray irregular shaped fields or fields with lots of obstacles and trees, this type of field with a drone? Like what's the
yeah.
recommended procedure and the current capability, from the drones?
Mhm. Mapping. I mean, I'm a huge advocate for mapping the field first before you even step foot on there. Ideally, you should map the field, which, photogrammetry, orthomosaics, that's kind of a couple terms that you can look around for courses on that. You basically map the field first on the software. You delineate where you want to spray, where your boundaries are, where the obstacles are. At that point, you can do it a few different ways. We like to trick the system a little bit, but we also use a different platform, the DJI, which can do things that DJI can't. What we basically do a lot of times is that we'll kind of do our flight plan in reverse, where we go through and we trim the edges, if you will, where it's doing the outside, following the contour of the boundary. Once that's done, then the flight plan is shrunken inwards by the boundary that you put going along it, and then you just do your regular back and forth. By doing it that way, it does speed up the actual application process rather than having it going just straight back and forth, up and down and up and down. Because every time it gets close to that obstacle, it's going to slow right down and navigate around it and then come back. So that speeds up the efficiency. For actual obstacles inside the field, that's going to be situational. If you have a pivot in the middle of the field, a lot of operators choose to just kind of cut where the pivot is, and then they might spray that pivot area by hand. Me personally, we usually map just the day before that we're going out. We tell the farmer or the grower, don't move the pivot. It's got to stay there until after we're done, basically. And what I'll do, I let it just go fly straight towards it, and then I hand raise my elevation to go up and back down over the pivot. So I do that by hand, but that's, like you said, that's a little bit more of an experienced operator type of thing. But usually you can cut off, and segment your flights, so you have one area on the south end and say a second flight plan on the north end. So a lot of those, it's going to be situational of how you handle infield obstacles like that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You have to differentiate the obstacles to two different types. One is the type that you cannot fly over. You just have to go around. That will slow you down. But stuff like pivot, or like a weather station, or some other fixed structure, on the ground that you can fly over.
Wires from towers and stuff.
Yeah, or a pile of trash, some stuff you have in the field, you can fly them over.
The tractor that they left out there during lunch break,
Yeah, something like that. All right. Let's move on to some of the attendee questions. Are there any specific formulations that lead to better results when applied by the drone? I think this person may be also saying, are there any formulation leads to worse results when applied by drone? So do you see any formulation preference by the drone so far?
No, I mean, you kind of touch base on the whole like chemical incompatibility. So if you have, thicker items that aren't really, they don't flow as well because of vegetation, sure, those aren't going to be as good. But as far as specific formulation characteristics that lead to better results when applied by a drone, I have seen dozens. They're usually on the smaller scale when it comes to insecticides and herbicides. But your basic row crop items, I can't really speak to that as much because we kind of just, we just go out and do it, and we don't really do the science behind that. I can tell you that for example, we use BTK for gypsy moth there, and it has been proven that drones apply it way better than helicopters or airplanes, mainly because we're getting the prop wash that penetrates the canopy and saturates everything underneath. But that's a very specific type of application. When you're doing row crops, you're kind of more going in transitional lifts, so you're not actually kind of pushing it into the canopy, unless if you specifically choose to fly like that, of course. But generally speaking, you're kind of up above and you're flying and you're letting it kind of just waft down behind you, but you're not really pushing it through. So general row crops, I would say that it's not really better. I wouldn't say it's worse either, but in certain circumstances, insecticides, herbicides, we're able to get that penetration and it is better.
Yeah. I will just add a little bit to the end because formulation issue is related to a tank compatibility problem. So based on my experience, after spraying for 2, 3 years with a drone, spraying all kind of chemicals, all different trials, generally speaking, if I see a true water soluble formulation, I start to feel happy,
Yeah.
because those are the ones giving me least compatibility problem. Salt
Yes.
water soluble formulation is great. The drawback with water soluble or SL formulation is the foam. Liberty foam like crazy at 2 GPa. So make sure you have a good defoamer. Just need a little bit in your tank and
Hmm.
kill that foam because foam is a problem at low GPA operation. Foam doesn't really hurt the drone, but the problem is the drone tank is not that big, 10, 11 gallons. If you have a lot of foams, you can only fill up that tank to 8 gallons. The top 2, 3 gallons all foam. No. So
Yeah.
that reduced the tank capacity because of that. And then formulations I really hate are the anything dry. Anything
Oh
dry.
yeah.
Wettable
I don't do
powders,
anything. I don't
it
do
doesn't matter.
any wettable powders, no dry.
Granules, yeah.
I refuse to do any of those.
Yeah,
Won't do
those things are terrible because
it. Yep.
almost as soon as they leave the hot mixing tank, because in hot mixing tank on trailer, we have vegetation. As soon as you
Yep.
pump your juice into the drone tank, they start to,
Yep.
forming this thick of a cake icing at the bottom of the
Yep.
tank. So
I
it's
I
heavy.
will not mess with any of that stuff ever again.
Yeah,
Nope.
exactly.
Not
Yeah,
for me.
dry
Not for
formulation, exactly.
me. Not for me.
Exactly. All right. Next question. Information on rotary atomizer and hydraulic nozzles. In which conditions should you use which one? I'm sure you have seen this one before. Your preference.
Yeah, well,
Rotary
I mean,
atomizer
I
versus
don't even
hydraulic.
use rotary nozzles. So I only use, the hydraulics, just the regular, like T-jets and whatnot. I don't use rotary nozzles whatsoever. So I kind of can't really speak to that. Myself personally, I don't really see a good benefit into using them for our operations, at least. I've seen plenty of times where, especially at least on the T40s, could be, production issues, but those things just end up leaking like crazy. And for me personally, I don't want to be ferrying back and forth across, a field somewhere and having it just dripping out as it goes back and forth. So me personally, I just don't use rotary nozzles at all. Hydraulic nozzles for me is the way to go. You can use everything from fine all the way up to coarse and everything in between. Yeah.
I'll speak on this question as well, since we don't have other panelists. I use both. I started with a hydraulic nozzle drone, and now it's pretty much all rotary atomizer. Pros and cons on both sides. Nothing is perfect.
Yeah,
For
exactly.
hydraulic nozzles, the benefit is you can change different nozzle tips to get the droplet size you want, and also you are able to get a really big droplet size. When you spray higher altitude tree type of work or want to prevent the drift. So you have more way to customize your droplet size. But then the drawback we found with hydraulic nozzle, particularly bigger drones with 16, with 20 hydraulic nozzle is they constantly getting clogged all the time. And this is a big problem for my operation, I guess. A lot of time the drone came back and then you're running the end of the day cleaning and you realize, oh, two nozzles get clogged, only spitting water out sideways, and you didn't know when this happened. So for a commercial operation, it may not be a huge deal, but when it gets to spray and trial, spray and treatment, you're looking for a picture perfect application. That's always a
Mhm.
problem. And also not replacing, changing the nozzles from one type to the other. I mean, when you have 16 or 20 nozzles you have to do on a regular basis, that take a lot of time. So the time part, because we do research, a lot of time we
Yeah,
have to spray with 3 or 4 type of nozzle, putting one type on, taking it off, putting it on, taking it
yeah,
off, just take a lot of time. With rotary atomizer, The good thing about it is when you need a really fine droplets, this thing is a blessing, like a mist.
Mhm.
If I need to penetrate thicker canopy. And also the rotary atomizer create a pretty big circle, so it's a circle shape. It covers a little wider area, because of the shape, depends on how you position it. And then the other thing we found useful with rotary atomizer is if you spray thicker tank mix, my T30, the hydraulic nozzle drone struggle. It just can't spray. It's too thick.
Yeah,
Rotary atomizer can handle it just fine. Way thicker, higher viscosity tank mix, that the rotary atomizer is the way to go. But the
yeah,
drawback is leaking. That's one thing. Hopefully that can be improved down the road. Second, the flooding a rotary atomizer. If you use too much of the flow rate, your rotary atomizer is not spinning fast enough. We
right.
have seen this all the time. The rotary atomizer is not atomizing the liquid, it's dripping from the edges.
Yeah,
So we see on water sensor paper really big hits, almost like raindrops,
yeah,
soybean seed size. So that's
yeah,
not
exactly.
good. The dripping is a problem, And also you need to pay attention to the edge. Like there are lots of teeth, serrated teeth around the edge of the atomizer. You need to make
Yeah,
sure those are not damaged. If they are damaged, you're gonna have a lot of that dripping problem,
right,
because
right.
the teeth around the edge controls the
Yep.
droplet size. And also for rotary atomizer, even though the manufacturer claims you can get up to 500 micron, that's really hard to get in reality. 500 micron is usually smaller, and also it don't go bigger than that. For lots of high altitude tree or forestry application, I want something bigger than 600, more consistent.
Right.
So
Yeah, I
again,
got you.
good and
Yeah, it's
bad.
like I said, it's kind of just, pros and cons. And for our type of application, like I said, it's that to us, we don't really foresee a big benefit between it. So we stick with hydraulics for right now. We're pretty good at swapping out the tips now, 16 or more tips, and we can do that in 5 minutes. Calibrating it takes the longest sometimes, but otherwise it's, wham bam and done.
Yeah.
Wow. Let's see. Yeah, I think we're running out a little bit of time here. So Bill Curran's asking about the big boy.
Mhm.
So that is yeah, it does have a 20-gallon tank. I'll go ahead and scoot off to the side here. Don't mind the mess, guys. Like I mentioned before, we just moved into this building and we're still kind of getting everything organized. But these are the Bro UAVs. That's the 72 liter, and this is the 50. No, sorry, this is the 72. That's the 52 liter. So you can see the spray tanks are obviously a lot bigger. And yes, these are about 7 feet tall. I mean, I'm 6'2", by the way, and it's over
Wow.
my head. So it's got a 20-gallon tank on it, and one of the biggest parts that I like, if I can kind of get this here. So the tubings on here, the pumps on them and everything, they're thicker than anything that you're going to find on the DJI stuff. So you see, you could actually fit one of the DJI lines directly inside of that thing. So that's mainly why I like these big boys so much, for the bulk work only. These things just sit in the shop until fungicide season happens, basically. For everything else, we're using the T30 on.
Mhm.
But yeah, so there's that. Certain time of day best for mapping. Yeah, so time of day for mapping really depends on what you're trying to accomplish. Generally speaking, high noon or an overcast day is the best time to map, mainly because you're trying to reduce the amount of shadows that happen. If you have a tree and you have a shadow that's going underneath it, sometimes the software will think that that shadow underneath is also a tree branch and try to render it. So there's a lot that goes into photogrammetry, and I don't really want to explain that too much because that's an entire subject by itself. But generally speaking, high noon or overcast days are the best time for mapping.
Yep.
Maximum speed for max wind that you would fly in for drone spraying, that's a little bit situational as well. Also depends on what kind of material you're using. how the wind is coming across as well. You know, is it a steady or is it gusting? Label rates for most stuff is calling for 10-mile-per-hour winds as the cutoff. And kind of speaking from experience, once you start creeping up to 10 anyway, things start getting unmanageable. You know, we go for quality over quantity. We don't just say, oh, well, it's 9.7 mile per hour winds. Let's keep spraying, guys. We would probably just cut off the day, because if we can't guarantee a good application, we cut it off.
Yeah.
But once again, that comes down to, you know, using drift reduction agents, which we're going to be tinkering with. You probably know, yeah, remember Mark from the conference with Windfall. Yeah, we're going to be playing around with that this year too. See how that works. I've heard good things so far.
Yeah. His DRA is picking up momentum after the drone conference. You know, I know several guys, several operators
Yeah.
bought his Windfall DRA. You know.
Yep.
Yeah.
I've never really used them before. I did tinker with some, you know, drift reduction, you know, DRAs just for drift reduction, and I didn't like it because the stuff was, it was just coming out and it was just falling straight down. Like I had
Down.
like a 7-foot swath, and I'm like, screw this, you know, let's just do without it. But
Yeah.
you give Windfall a try, you know.
Yeah, that's a bigger problem for your hydraulic nozzle than a rotary atomizer because you will
Yep.
have the pattern collapse problem. You know, when you use
Yeah,
too much of the RA, you need to be careful
exactly.
with that.
So,
Yeah.
all right.
And also the other thing I'll follow up since the question asked about wind or wind effect. 10 mile per hour is a good general rule of thumb. You know, different chemistry is a little bit different. And then at the same time, if you want to increase the job quality and you're spraying with a little bit wind or some wind, you know, drift agent is good, and also increase your gallon per acre. You know, don't always spray 2, spray 3 or 4. You know, more
Right.
water is better
Yeah.
in that regard. And also fly a little slower, fly a little lower. You know, all those things help too. You know,
Yeah.
use a little bigger droplets, more
Yeah.
volume, bigger droplets. So.
Yeah. Yep. Very true.
Yeah, a
Yeah.
few
I think we
things to
got
mention.
one more question here. Did you want
Yeah.
to take this one?
So what if herbicide your client wants you to spray is not registered for drone application and you're a commercial operator? That's a great question. It's a good question.
It's an easy one for me.
Yeah.
So in New York State, at the very least, and Pennsylvania and Vermont, the places that we operate in, the consensus, which has come right from the the Department of Ag, or in New York as the DEC, Department of Environmental Conservation, which, by the way, the DEC in New York State, they're no joke. They have the power of arrest, and they can and will arrest you, and they have investigators and everything. So when it comes to by the book, the most regulated type of states you can say is New York, is basically. They have said that as long as the pesticide label is labeled for aerial application, you can follow those same rates and recommendation, or not recommendations, the law that the label has. It does not need to specify by saying drone application, because as of right now, I think there's no labels that say, that have drone rates specifically. I think there may be a couple of supplementals out there that, include it, but realistically speaking, there's nothing out there that's specific for drones. All right. So basically, as long as, and check with your state ag department though, because sometimes they say, some places may be different, but in New York State, at least, as long as it has an aerial applicator or aerial application method listed on the label, drones can use it, no problem.
Yeah, that's a general rule of thumb from for other states, and also that's the EPA's perspective as well. But even though EPA says as long as the label has an aerial application section, and then you can use a drone to apply, they also say you need to check with your state department ag to see if there is any additional restriction, because your state department ag can ban certain product being sprayed
Yeah.
by certain equipment. Also, I'll say one more thing. Herbicide wise, the problem with area application is the lowest GPA allowed. That is always in the way. We want to spray
Mhm.
lower GPA, but majority of the herbicide labels, if it comes with a area application section, those would say 5 or 10 GPA minimum.
Yeah.
That is definitely a problem for drone spray.
Yeah. Yeah. For my big boys, it's not a problem. I'll tell you that. But yeah, absolutely. 5 gallons an acre. A lot of people don't realize the huge difference between when you go from 1 gallon an acre up to 2 gallons an acre, even up to 3 gallons an acre, and then up to 5. It's huge loss of efficiency and productivity. So, if you're a drone sprayer and somebody wants you to spray at 10 gallons an acre, use caution is really all I'm going to say on that, and price accordingly.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. I don't see any open questions, and I see the QR code from Emily already. I don't know if we want to do a last call, last round of call for questions.
Yeah, I think this is the time to do it. Thank you everybody for these were great questions and so many of them. Uh I would say for anybody in the audience, but also the panelists, if you have any last questions, let's see if we can get one more in. Maybe two if Steve and Rick talk really fast.
Well, maybe the audience already heard enough of us,
Yeah,
ready to move on.
probably. Yeah, no, I mean, really all I can kind of end, to kind of wrap up a lot of the stuff that we talked about here is that the drones that are coming out, and even all the operators that are coming out, the different support things that are coming out for it, this is a very blossoming industry, and it is growing rapidly, but it's also starting to mature now. So it's kind of one of those, you're starting to see a lot more standardized discussions and information. If you go back even a couple of years ago, it was kind of like the Wild West with 30 different people who never actually used the drones were actually the ones out there giving advice to people.
Yeah.
And it's like, how can you give advice on something that you read out of a textbook and haven't actually put your hands on one? So with that being said, I mean, this sort of technology is really going to help advance support for farmers in general, or growers in general. But it's like you said, it's a lot that goes into it. It's not as easy as just picking up, buying a drone, picking it out of the box, starting to fly, and boom, all your stuff is magically solved. Um, let's see. Do you see drone spraying becoming more prevalent than ground-based or airplane? What is the time frame? I think we kind of briefly touched on this, and it kind of goes into what I'm saying right now. Is that it's definitely a tool under your tool belt. It's not going to take over any of those aspects, at least anytime soon whatsoever. I mean, you're talking at least 5 to 10 years before you really start seeing any, major traction made on that. It's just simply due to technology limitations and such. But we're definitely getting there, and every year that goes by, technology keeps advancing, and our understanding of everything keeps advancing too.
Yeah.
So, if you're interested, definitely get in on it. But if it's just understand, it's not just a pick it up and fly, and it's an overnight learning type of thing.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
ongoing.
well, you remind me something, Rick, because there is a question I think it would be good to cover briefly at least. Who should buy a spray drone and who should just hire commercial operators to spray? Now, I do want
Mhm.
to remind the private applicator, or the true farmers that if you decided to buy these drones and use it, they are probably more labor intensive in terms of the drone operation. They are more labor intensive than you think. If you're so used to spray or high boy, two people can handle high boy operation just fine. But if you want to do decent amount of if you want to spray decent amount of acres, run efficient drone operation, you need at least 4 people or probably more. So that's something to keep in mind. The labor requirement is higher currently for drone spraying. Also think about your ROI. If you don't spray enough acres with your drone in a year, you're just losing money because we talk about this already. They don't last longer than 3-4 years. So before they lose their value completely and go into a dumpster, you better squeeze out all of the value, and spray your field, before the day. So you got to calculate how many acres can I realistically spray a season with it. And we have seen people overestimate or being over optimistic, dump $150,000, bought several T40, big mixing trailer and whatever, not even one season, start to sell them all.
Yep.
So that's a mistake from the front end. You just didn't think clearly or haven't done enough homework to begin with.
Yep. Yeah, like I said, it's definitely not a, just a everyday casual type of thing. It's an undertaking. Even if you're a private grower and you just want to do this for your own stuff out back, you got to keep in mind, I mean, there's still licensing requirements, there's reporting requirements, there's insurance requirements, maintenance requirements on top of that. You can't just let these, the batteries and everything just sit there for a whole year until you use it again next year. You got to maintain the batteries. It's pretty much a full-time, type of gig. So, just kind of keep that in mind before you decide which way you want to go. Contracting out to somebody else or trying to do it yourself.
Yeah. All right.
Yes, thank you. I feel like the expertise needed to do this was well on display today. So yeah, thank you for that closing point, Rick.
Yep.
This has been really educational. I so appreciate you both giving us so much of your time. Especially I know Rick is gonna bolt and go fly his drone the second we let him go here. So I appreciate you making time to be here.
No problem. Thanks for having me, and nice chat with you again, Steve. As always, I'm sure we'll get together again and chat all day again.
Yeah, I appreciate thanks for taking the time to do this. Yeah, I owe you a beer.
Yeah. Well, I mean, maybe I can drink it next time I come down, right?
Yeah, exactly.